Hi, I'm Ziva Brandstetter. I'm a senior editor here at Reveal. And we're here today to talk about some incredible reporting that these two women and a team of reporters have been doing for several years now about a really important topic that is part of this whole Me Too conversation. And it actually started several years ago with this reporting on rape on the night shift. We're going to talk about how that reporting developed. But first, let me introduce Bernice Yeung, who is a Reveal reporter, and Sasha Khokha, who is the host of the California Report magazine on KQED. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ziva.
Yeah, great to be here.
And I just wanted to let people know that our partners on this Project Rape on the Night Shift investigation were Frontline, KQED, Univision, and the Investigative Reporting Program at UC Berkeley. And also want to let you all know that who are following along out there to please submit questions in the comments section, and we will get to those. And let us know if you want to share any tips or feedback with the reporters about this project. So, Bernice, can you tell me a little bit about how this story landed on your desk? I know it's developed over a period of many years.
That's right. It actually goes all the way back to, the early, mid-2000s, if you can believe it. It all started with a graduate student at UC Berkeley's journalism school. She was on an internship, was looking into child labor in the fields, and in the process learned about a incident where a farm worker was having to forced to have sex with her supervisor every year in order to keep her job every season. So obviously that was shocking and startling. She goes back to Berkeley and talks to her advisors, and they encourage her to continue working on this story. And it was a story that was obviously very challenging to do in fits and starts and in a short time period. And so this reporting team actually picked this up in 2012. And from that emerged our first investigation into sexual assault among low-wage immigrant workers, farm workers, which we called rape in the fields. And it was really, to answer your question, the one of the first interviews that we did for Rape in the Fields was with a government attorney. And in that interview, he said, yes, this is definitely a problem within farm work, a very serious problem, but you should also look at how this issue plays out among night shift janitors. He said, the dynamics are very similar. Same demographic of worker, same issues around isolation, barriers to reporting related to language barriers and also immigration status, and just being low-wage workers who are kind of operating and earning kind of paycheck to paycheck.
And I can imagine as an investigative reporter at that moment, you were probably just like, oh my gosh, there's this entire area of important work to do that I now am responsible for, like, finding out what's going on. And then how did Sasha come into this?
You know, it's really interesting because this collaborative team came together in kind of an unusual way. I was reporting in the Central Valley of California, and I had been reporting on women who had been assaulted in the fields. I did my first interview with a woman back in 2006 named Olivia Tamayo, who was raped by her supervisor. I did a story for National Public Radio, did a story for our show, The California Report. And then as this team was coming together, I actually went to the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism with Andres Sediel and Daffodil Altan, who are also part of the team. And they approached me and said, hey, you're on the ground here. You report on farm workers all the time and on rural communities. Do you want to jump in on this project with us? And so we had such synergy, and there was such an incredible multi-platform collaborative spirit from the beginning that we were going to do this not only for Frontline and television, but we were going to do it for radio, we were going to do it for text articles and print, and we had a commitment to doing it bilingually. And I think that's really unique about this project. From the beginning, we knew that Univision was going to be a partner. I was able to get some of the stories also on Radio Bilingüe in Spanish. We did a Spanish language version of Rape on the Night Shift here at Reveal. So it's a very ambitious project. But I think one of the things that really sets it apart is we had a commitment not only to reach change makers and people in power, but the affected communities themselves. And that's part of what helped the women decide to participate in both of these projects, is they knew that if they shared their stories, they might be able to reach other people like them, other people who are immigrants working in these isolated industries, oftentimes undocumented, feeling like there's nobody else out there to talk to.
That's a really good point, and it kind of leads to my next question. Talk about what makes these women particularly vulnerable to sexual harassment and assault. We've heard a lot in the amazing reporting that's been done as part of this Me Too movement about women who are already in places of power, and they're being harassed for years, and it's gone sort of unreported. So talk about what makes these women that you've written about particularly vulnerable.
I think the isolation of their workplaces is a really important aspect of all of this. We've talked to night shift janitors who say that their supervisors attack them or rape them in supply closets where they knew there would be no security cameras, in bathrooms, in parking garages. And this is all happening late at night when no one else is around because they're working the graveyard shift. But of course, there's also the issues around immigration status.
Yes.
And deportation is often a very frequent and powerful weapon that is used against these women. They're told, I'm going to call ICE, I'm going to call La Migra if you don't succumb. And a lot of these women are mothers, sometimes single mothers. They've got kids here. Some of them are American born. The idea of being separated from their families is just not something they can really fathom.
Wow. Is this something, Sasha, that you came across in your reporting as well? The threat of deportation, especially these days, it must be.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, I think it's a tool that's used to silence people in many ways, whether it's in a context of domestic violence in the home. But in this case, we're talking about supervisors for the most part who are the alleged perpetrators. And they have so much power over these women. They control whether or not they get a paycheck. And they're oftentimes the only point of contact for these women at the work site. They're the only people they're seeing. They may come around to the different floors of the building and check on all the women or check on multiple job sites. And over we heard that, he told me that if I said something, I would either lose my job, which means I can't feed my family. A lot of these women are single moms, the sole providers for their kids. Or he said he would call La Migra or ICE.
And there's also a serious logistical issue here. If you're the only person who you're coming into contact with is your supervisor who is sexually assaulting you or harassing you, how do you then make a complaint?
Right.
It was just for a lot of the workers that we spoke to, it was never very clear to them what steps they should take in order to come forward and in order to try to put a stop to a lot of this. And then there's also the language barrier. Excuse me. Again, if it's not clear who to complain to,
Right.
and they're not comfortable making the complaint to HR, don't even know how to reach HR, and HR is only going to speak to you in English, and you're not an English speaker. Again,
Afraid of your immigration status, afraid of your boss.
If there is an HR. I mean, one of the things about janitorial work and farm work is that there's a lot of subcontracting. So you may be working for a labor contractor in the fields, but you're working on X farm. So the employer of record is actually the labor contractor. Same in the janitorial industry. There is so much subcontracting, so many mom and pop operations.
Right.
Some of them are fly by night. They may pop up one day and be gone the next. So it's really hard to figure out how do I complain or who's the employer of record.
Yeah, we're going to talk more later in the show about some of the solutions to that, some of the fixes that advocates are trying to make happen. We've got some questions here from folks. I'm gonna give you a little warning about this somewhat controversial question, but about Aziz Ansari, what you think about the reporting done on that. Give you time to think about it. But next, we're going to go to a clip on female janitors. You all spoke with a lot of female janitors, one of them being Erica Morales, who was just the women in this project were incredibly really impressive in the way that they and brave in the way that they dealt with the pain, the humiliation, the difficulty they faced. So I think this clip and the others demonstrate that well. So we have a clip from the Frontline show of Erica telling her story.
Empecé a ver que todo estaba mal cuando yo estaba haciendo una limpieza y él se sentaba a verme, nada más. Y yo le decía, ¿qué hace aquí? Y me dice, me vine a supervisar. Y digo, pero ya supervisó mi trabajo. Y Y me decía, no, vine a verte a ti. Siempre se parecía nada más como un fantasma y esta persona trató de abusar de mí, me golpeó, no sé cómo me defendí. No, él sabía que no había cámaras, yo gritaba y nadie me iba a oír, nadie me podía ver. No sé cómo me pude zafar de él. Afortunadamente lo hice. Y en cuanto se fue, yo quedé destrozada, yo quedé muy mal porque me tuve que cubrir por lo que él me había logrado arrancar. Y él se burlaba de mí, se reía en mi cara. Es algo que no se va a olvidar.
So that clip was one of several we're going to play from the Frontline documentary that's based on your reporting. We do have a question here from Kristen McBride. What is your opinion on the reporting done by GraceBabe.net on Aziz Ansari? And of course, the reporting did raise issues around consent and consensual sex. So do either of you want to tackle that difficult?
Well, I would say that, just on a personal level, I'm really glad that there's so much discussion around these very complex topics in such a public way.
These are discussions that need to be had.
And as a result, because they're tricky, sticky conversations, people are not going to agree with each other, and there's lots of gray area. I would say that when it comes to this reporting on Aziz, there's just differences in what we were working on here versus the Babe piece. We were looking at it at industries. We were looking at workers, where there was a very clear power dynamic between, the supposed perpetrators and the victims.
Right.
I think that we also, as I understand it, there are some distinctions in our approach to the reporting as well, because we did a lot of work to seek out the perspective of the accused.
To corroborate with court records, with police reports, with extensive documentation.
And I think a lot of the reporting on Me Too, I'm happy to say, has been very thorough and thoughtful.
Absolutely.
And has really tried to do that vetting that is necessary.
Has to happen out of fairness and just good journalistic practices. So basically, these issues are all important. They're not necessarily, the Aziz story is not necessarily related much, if at all, to the issues that you all are raising, but it's important to hear everyone's voice.
Absolutely.
That's right. I just wanted to chime in quickly about the Erica Morales clip that we just saw.
Yeah, please do.
Talk a little bit about the process of getting some of these women to go on camera to share their stories and their faces, because it really was a kind of reporting that I think you can't underestimate the amount of time that it takes.
Because traditionally, news organizations give complete anonymity to victims of sexual assault and rape.
That's right.
And they don't feel comfortable coming forward often. So
That's
how did
right.
you talk about
Well,
that?
and so this took a number of months, a number of conversations. It wasn't like we just showed up with microphones and cameras and said, hey, tell us about being assaulted. It was a lot of relationship building. In the case of Erica Morales, Daffodil Altan and I had a number of conversations with her. We went down to Bakersfield and met with her. We checked in with her over the phone. It was a lot about relating, just sort of hearing her story, hearing about her life, where she was at that point. She had left being a janitor. She kind of wanted to put this behind her.
Yeah.
She had gone on to become kind of a local celebrity. She has an internet radio show in Spanish. She was a personality in her community. So there was a lot at risk for her.
She didn't have a lot to gain from doing that.
Right. And there was a lot at risk, actually, for her to sort of come out in this role as a spokesperson around something that was very painful for her. That wasn't her persona
Right.
on the radio. And so, it's a kind of reporting that's very delicate and does take time. We went down and I remember had lunch with her at a Chinese restaurant, just sort of talked with her, but we didn't pressure the women. I want to be very clear about that. We talked about what we were doing and that there was
And
an
why.
opportunity and why, and that there was an opportunity to share her story in both English and Spanish. She had been a plaintiff in a class action lawsuit in the Central Valley where there are a number of women who came forward with allegations, many of them against the same supervisor. But she had kind of put it behind her. And it's the kind of thing, Bernice and I know this well, where, we may have a number of texts and phone calls with these women. They seem enthusiastic. They're
And then
ready
they
to go.
disappear.
And then they disappear. And then they kind of drop off the map and you're like, are we going down there to shoot this and record this or not? And it's a lot of just having to be nimble and spontaneous. Like, okay, Erica's ready to tell her story. Let's pack up and go to Bakersfield and do it because, now she feels ready and prepared. And as you can see, she was very emotional. I mean, we had a number of conversations, but every time she told the story, it brought up a lot. It brought up a lot of emotion. She was pregnant actually during the interview, was starting her life over with a new partner and just really moving forward.
I thought one of the most powerful parts of the documentary was the talking to the husband of one of these women. I mean, and the way that it made him feel as a man and the effect on their kids. And I mean, this work really brings out the debilitating effect it has on people, the woman and the people around her.
A ripple effect. Well, and I think it's also really important to talk about the kids.
Right.
In a number of cases, these women had not told their children what had happened to them or their partners in some cases. And you can really see how it changes the whole family dynamic. I mean, there was one woman we talked to who was assaulted at the Ferry Building in San Francisco. She had a teenage son at the time. And, he talks about just the memory of his mother holding up in her room and crying, and they didn't know why.
What's wrong?
They didn't know what was happening. Was she just depressed? It has this ongoing effect on a whole ecosystem, a whole community, not just the person who was assaulted.
We have a reader question who asks, how do you see or expect to see the Me Too movement's efforts to dethrone powerful figures make its way down to people in low-level positions of power, like shift managers and janitorial supervisors? So this is really on point with your investigation. I have to say, just as a viewer watching the film, it's a little frustrating because you want to see for these women like what more happen, and so do you expect that this movement, Me Too, will sort of filter down and the impact will be felt by the types of managers that work with these women?
Well, I think what's been so remarkable about the Me Too movement among Hollywood politicians, media, is that you're seeing actual repercussions for the behavior. And I think it's still an open question as to whether for blue-collar workers, that level of accountability is happening. So I think that's where the push needs to happen. I think there can be a lot that, public awareness can start to activate. I think that, if you're mindful of who your janitorial company is in the building that you're in your office building, you can start to ask questions.
What are your policies?
Right.
What's your training?
Do you have sexual harassment policies in place? What are the consequences for sexual harassment? I think these are the types of engagement that, the general public can have in really pushing for greater accountability.
Yeah. So if you own a company, you subcontract out your cleaning, which many companies do. It's sort of incumbent on all of us to make sure that things are done.
And we've
correctly.
actually been getting a lot of questions and feedback from small janitorial companies across the country who want to do the right thing. They're writing us and saying, what can I do better? I don't want this to happen to my workers. And, we have some examples where they've figured out how to operate and have, for example, janitors work in pairs, not alone. Have janitors work during the daytime, not necessarily at night. I know at our offices at KQED, the janitors are there emptying the waste baskets while we're working.
Yeah.
So I think, there's some very simple fixes that some companies are able to take on and change their practices. But, these harassers or these perpetrators are not high-level public figures, whose reputation is going to be dethroned the way that we've seen in Hollywood. So it is a very different dynamic.
Okay. We have, I just want to remind you all following along out there to please submit your questions in the comments. We're getting a lot of questions, some good ones. We have several questions here from Cherie Kren, and she asks, which state has the biggest problem? And then also asks, is there a specific government official looking into this activity? And so you all did highlight some particular companies, but I'm not sure that we know which state has the biggest problem. Talk a little bit, Bernice, about, is there data to answer that question?
I think the best that I can say is that we know where the states with the largest janitorial workforces. So they're
Right.
like New York, California, Illinois,
The big immigrant
Texas.
states.
Yes, exactly. And also the states with very large cities where there are lots of buildings that need to be cleaned.
Office buildings.
So yes, so I think that's an area where we could safely say that there's a large janitorial workforce.
Okay.
But in terms of politicians who are really tackling this issue, we've definitely seen in California and Oregon some state legislators who've taken this issue on directly and introduced and passed legislation specifically targeted at combating sexual harassment among night shift janitors.
Okay, great. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So Erica worked for one of the companies that was the focus of the investigation. Was anyone ever held responsible for what happened to Erica and some of the other women at ABM? Talk a little bit, Sasha, about
So,
that.
as I mentioned, there was a class action lawsuit that Erica was the lead plaintiff for. There were 21 women actually who came forward from the Central Valley of California and, filed a case against ABM, the nation's largest janitorial company, for failing to protect them. And in many cases, they pointed to one supervisor, the same person, Jose Vasquez, who we highlight in the film. He never suffered any repercussions in terms of criminal prosecution. So this case with the EEOC, was a civil case. It was not a criminal case. We
And that's
actually...
the Equal Opportunity and
That's
Employment Commission,
correct.
the federal government, came in, sued ABM, and said essentially, you're not protecting these
That's right.
workers.
And they settled for about $6 million.
Wow.
And in fact, ABM is among a rare group of American companies that's been sued multiple times by the federal government for failing to protect women from sexual harassment. So there were some changes that happened as a result of that settlement. They had to have some additional oversight when they were looking into sexual harassment cases. There was another case that they settled involving a janitor who says she was assaulted at the Ferry Building in San Francisco. They had to take some additional steps when looking at cases here in California because of that. But, overall, ABM was not happy with the way that they were portrayed in our reporting. We asked them again and again to send us, to do an interview with us, to have a back and forth. They didn't. They sent us initially a videotape statement, which you can see in the film, and then they sent us several written statements after that.
And summarize Bernice, their response to all of this was along the lines of, there are individual claims, some, we're sort of not responsible. This is not a company-wide practice and procedure that we're responsible for.
Right. So they're saying that even though they were sued multiple times, they did settle all of those cases, and they did not admit any wrongdoing in the process settling those cases. They said that they have really kind of best-in-class sexual harassment policies in place, zero tolerance for it. And I think a point that they make, which is, I think, an important one, is that they are a very large enterprise, the largest in the country. And so when they receive complaints of sexual harassment, they actually have a human resources department to address it, to investigate. They actually respond to civil complaints and lawsuits. There are a very large portion of the janitorial industry are small, tiny mom and pop operations. Some of them fly by night, some of them working in the black market, who just, will shutter and change their name the second they get a sexual harassment complaint. So they're saying that the reason that they're so high profile in this issue is because they actually do their best to respond.
Okay.
And just to say, we did talk with the janitors union here in California, and they've said that they think ABM has stepped up on this issue.
There have been changes,
The union has actually been able to incorporate some language around sexual harassment into their union contracts, and the union's telling us that they think ABM is stepping up and really taking this issue more seriously when they bring these cases to their bring these complaints to them on behalf of the janitors they represent.
Okay. And that kind of leads us into our next clip. But first, a question. So talk about the impacts of this reporting in California and Oregon. The documentary talked about, the updated version of the documentary talked about how some of the women worked together to draw attention to this issue. And they went to pretty extreme lengths in some cases. What did the organizing look like, and how did they get lawmakers' attention? Bernice, can you talk about that?
Sure. So the documentary was screened by the California Janitors Union, and for them, it just completely changed the way that they address this issue. I think it had been, kind of on the radar, kind of on the back burner. They were aware,
yeah.
but not something they tackled very actively. After the documentary, and they saw how prevalent and intense and problematic this was, they really just jumped on this issue. One of the first things that they did was they conducted a survey of their membership and were just shocked to learn that a vast majority of their members had personally experienced sexual harassment.
A vast majority.
50% had experienced it, and another 25% had witnessed it.
Wow.
So then that just led to a whole host of actions. They fought for legislation. There were rallies and marches. They were holding up signs that said, "End rape on the night shift." They were blocking traffic and acts of civil disobedience.
There was a hunger
They
strike.
put billboards up next to the freeways, which was very surreal, I think, for me and Bernice as the reporters on this, to see the name of our investigation, Rape on the Night Shift, up on these billboards,
Wow.
Saying "End rape on the night shift." There was an image of a woman being grabbed from behind. Sometimes there was an image of a woman with duct tape over her mouth. It was very dramatic.
Incredibly,
And the union and the organizers, they chose to go to those extremes. Even there was sometimes where they would put red paint on their jeans. I mean,
Wow.
this is graphic stuff, but it was like, this is real, and we want you to know about it. And as you say, they did hold a hunger strike outside of the state capitol in California, in Sacramento, to try to get this bill passed. Janitors were out there singing, releasing doves. I mean, it was very dramatic.
What struck me and we'll see this clip in a second, it wasn't a radical piece of legislation. It was like, let's have some training, right? Essentially.
Right.
So let's watch this clip from the documentary about that.
Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher introduced AB 1978, a bill requiring sexual harassment training for all janitorial employees and employers. Companies that failed to comply with the law would not be able to do business in California.
That was the beginning of a very public fight to win AB 1978.
Here's an unusual attempt to encourage Governor Brown to sign a piece of legislation.
We put up billboards across the Bay Area that we were hoping the governor would see so that he would sign AB 1978.
Que este daño, estas violaciones, ese acoso sexual vive dentro de nosotros. Y cuando lo callamos por tantos años, se hacen nudos y enfermedades en nuestro cuerpo.
The Yabasta women came out in force, demonstrating in front of the state capitol.
Then the women themselves did a hunger strike at the end to wait on a signature.
Y dijimos, vamos a hacer una huelga, pero no tanto porque sea una huelga de hambre, es un tanto para presionar, pero otro tanto para limpiarnos. ¿Por qué? Porque no.
A powerful clip, and shows the impact of this reporting. We have a question from Tish Greer who asks, where would a woman go to report an employer? Would she have to report the entire company or just someone in the company? So, Bernice, can you answer that? What should women do out there who want to report, and a janitor who wants to report something?
So there is, as we've been talking about, the federal U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're the federal agency that polices sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace. So there are phone numbers. They have offices in many states. So that's one place that you could go. If many states also have a version that's at a state level.
Okay.
So here in California, for example, it's the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. So if you want to go to your local state, you feel more comfortable going locally, that's another option.
Okay.
And then if you really, are not yet comfortable going to the government, There are a lot of women's organizations, worker advocates, your union, that can really help facilitate next steps.
Okay. And we'll try to find some of those links and put them in the comment field for people who are following along. And I do want to encourage you, if you have questions about the investigation, about this issue, please submit them in the comment field because we have the experts right here who can answer it. So your story focused on ABM. It is the largest, company that providing janitorial service in the country. But how common is this issue of sexual assault and harassment of janitors beyond that company? And talk a little bit about that. Do you think this is a systemic problem, or is it just mainly one company?
I think as we've been talking about, this is an industry where the problem can be kind of baked in. I mean, women are working in isolated buildings alone at night, the offices that many of us occupy during the day, and oftentimes there are no eyes and ears.
Male managers.
That's right. And as we've said, ABM is the largest company. There were a number of cases that we were able to find documented against them, and we decided to focus on them because of the power of the women's stories that had been involved in those cases. But this is not just a problem with one American janitorial company. And in fact, a number of the people that we've talked with who kind of watchdog this industry have said, imagine if this is happening at a company that does have an HR department, that does say it has a hotline set up for people to call, that does, some kind of training,
has policies,
et cetera. Imagine what's happening for those companies that are really fly by night, that may just have a couple of employees, may pop up here and there. For me, one of the most powerful moments in the reporting was actually getting to follow some of the people with the Maintenance Cooperation Trust Fund, these kind of undercover investigators, a lot of them former janitors, who go into the buildings. They're primarily focused here in California. They have a little operation in Massachusetts, but they go into buildings, they drive around office parking lots of the buildings at night, go inside, kind of scope the entrances, go talk to workers and just say like, hey, how are you doing? Are you getting paid? Have you been earning your overtime? And in the process of those conversations, they began to encounter women who had been assaulted or been harassed. And so I think those are really the companies that are much harder to pin down. There are no statistics about this. I mean, there are hardly any statistics about sexual violence and sexual harassment in general. It's very hard to quantify. Then you layer on top of that, you're talking about an immigrant workforce. You're talking about a workforce that could be in large part undocumented, non-English speaking. I mean,
small mom and pop shops that don't report things. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was one of the challenges in the reporting is like, can we say X number of women janitors have been raped on the job? No, we can't.
How do you quantify?
But everywhere we went, we heard these stories, and the people who've been looking at this industry for a long time validated that, this is a problem.
Pervasive issue.
The one, I think the efforts of that organization that has to kind of do these undercover operations really drives home how difficult it is to surface these cases and why any statistic that we would cite would be a severe undercount.
Right, because rape and sexual assault is vastly underreported anyway.
Vastly.
And then you bring in who these women are and the power imbalance.
That's right. So I think the numbers that we have been using is that, I think only a third of sexual assault and rape victims ever report the crime to authorities, and then in the workplace, about 50 people are sexually assaulted or raped at work every day.
Wow. That is a
that we know
number.
It's not
that we know of.
It's not inconsequential.
Yeah. Right. So multiply that by the number who aren't reporting. So I want to encourage you, if you're following along this really important discussion, to please submit your questions and your comments in the comment field. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to answer them. So bring us up to the present. We've talked a little bit about the Me Too movement. It does seem like it really focused on obviously on Hollywood, the amazing reporting that the New York Times did on starting out with the Weinstein story. It seems like it was eons ago, but this thing is just not, it's like October or something. Right. And then it's sort of moved into different sectors, but they've all been, the media, Hollywood sort of sectors of power. And I do feel like the conversation is starting to turn toward the victims who aren't heard from, the hotel workers. And I've heard some discussion about hotels doing things like panic buttons in the room. So how do these women fit into the Me Too movement? I mean, they're not really like getting on Twitter and using hashtags. And do you think people are paying attention now?
Well, I mean,
Starting
that's
to?
part of why we decided to revisit this investigation at this moment,
Right.
right? It's like, let's bring these voices back into the conversation. And, you know, you'd be surprised. There actually is a lot of social media going on. These women are on Facebook
Right.
and, you know, organizing their hunger strikes and doing their thing. And we checked back in with them. You know, we asked, how are you guys feeling about this moment? Are you feeling heard? And I think it's been a little bit bittersweet. On the one hand, it's like, great that there's so much attention to the fact that this dynamic exists in every strata of society for all women. On the other hand, you know, one of the women that we've been spending a lot of time with, Georgina Hernandez, she asks, you know,
What about
hey,
us?
exactly, when I spoke up, who was there to listen to me? And, you know, these are women who are important. These are women who have value in society, but I have value in society too. I'm a single mom. I'm a janitor.
I work hard. Yeah.
Right. And it matters for me too. So I think, you know, I think it's a little bit bittersweet for them, but I do think that there are some changes. I mean, we're seeing this Time's Up Now campaign, you know, that's really trying to incorporate the voices of all women, low-wage workers and otherwise, women from Hollywood donating money for a legal fund so that, you know, there can be some avenues, some recourse.
So and also, you know, I think we started to see a little bit more of an expansion of this Me Too movement when farm workers
That's right.
sent a letter in solidarity to their Hollywood sisters
Nice.
back in late 2017. And that started to get them on the radar. And, you know, they basically said, we stand by you because we have experienced the exact same thing. And I spoke to one of the organizers of that letter, and she said that, you know, similarly to the janitors that we've talked to, this kind of bittersweet sentiment of we're so proud, we're so happy that this is becoming part of the national conversation. But what about us? Are we being heard? Us too.
Yeah.
And, you know, and she said that some of the farm workers that she's spoken to, I mean, it was a startling kind of revelation that for them, this happens to other women also because they thought it was just part of their reality and part of what they had
Just
to
that,
deal with
right.
on the job. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, a really rich opportunity for kind of this cross-pollination among women. I do think that we do need to hear more from working-class, immigrant, low-wage workers. They're hard to access, as Sasha was discussing, but we need to really seek out their perspectives. And, you know, yes, the Time's Up Now effort is a really important one. I do hope they get beyond a legal fund because there are so many barriers for a lot of these women to even get to the point where they can report and seek legal help.
So let's talk about what these women are doing now. And there's a self-defense group. I mean, I'd like
incredible.
to have you all talk briefly about that, and then we're going to watch a clip of that.
I think it's really great to see it.
Yeah, powerful.
It's one thing to talk about it, but I mean, Bernice and I were in this room watching these women, some of whom we've known and interviewed over the years when they first came forward to tell their stories, were timid, meek, and here they are, and you'll see, they're taking these
Punching,
huge
yelling.
mannequins with these like menacing, intimidating faces and pretending to gouge their eyes out and practicing how to kick them in all the right places. It's really a sense of like, hey, legislation's one thing, speaking up is one thing, but knowing that I have the power in my body
Right.
to make myself safe and I can fight back, it's a whole other thing.
It's amazing. Well, let's watch the clip of that, the self-defense classes that some of these women profiled in this investigation are taking part in and leading.
As women in all walks of life are coming forward with accounts of sexual harassment, Lilia Garcia Brower's organization has been teaching janitors how to fight back.
I never thought that we would be sponsoring a self-defense group. I believe that every woman worker needs to understand how to defend themselves. It is very simple. It is not rocket science what we talk about. We're essentially looking to create an army of female janitors who are committed to go out and talk to as many female janitors as possible so that they too can understand that they have the power within them to defend themselves.
Oh, esta clase es maravilloso porque nos hace que seamos más seguras, que nosotras no necesitamos tener un cuerpo atlético para podernos defender y es tan fácil, no vamos a usar armas, nada más nuestras manos.
After hearing other janitors' stories, Marta Mejia came forward about the abuse she suffered.
Y eso me dio una fuerza para decir, no estoy sola, somos muchas mujeres.
I have to say that I just got chills again watching that. Tell me sort of your feelings about this clip and what these women are doing.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's just amazing to see the transformation of some of the women that we had met initially in the reporting several years ago now, going from just very timid and really still feeling the after effects of what had happened to them.
Like wounded.
Traumatized
Yeah.
to this point where, you know, she is, you know, really owning her power in this forceful, amazing way.
And sharing it with other women.
That's right, and serving as a leader, and it's just remarkable.
Some of the idea is actually to take this out to the buildings at night.
Wow.
So not just to expect women to show up at a self-defense class,
Right.
but to show up and, you know, on their break, whatever time that is, 2 a.m, teach them some moves, you know,
Yeah.
get women to the point where they can kind of make a mobile army of janitors, as I think they say in the clip.
And I think it's an important point that Lilia Garcia Brower, who you saw in the clip, she makes, which is this is not just about throwing a punch. You know, she takes this as an empowerment model. When we went to the class, it was not just about kicking and gouging people's eyes out.
Right, because if that's the solution, that's
right,
like,
right,
we've got more work to do.
Right, exactly. It was, how do you carry yourself with confidence? How do you communicate in a way that you're saying, no, I do not feel comfortable?
Right.
You know, and then worst case scenario, this is how you protect yourself.
Exactly.
Okay. Bernice, you have a new book coming out that is all about these topics that we've been talking about. Can you tell me a little bit about it, the title, when it's coming out, and give me a summary?
Gladly. It's called In a Day's Work: The Fight to End Sexual Violence Against America's Most Vulnerable Workers. I take a close look at night shift janitors, farm workers, domestic workers, a bit at hotel workers. It draws in part from this reporting and augments it. It also, I think it looks at the ways in which the legal system and just all of us, society, employers, fail these workers when they experience sexual harassment. But I also think it tells some really powerful and inspiring stories of women who are speaking out and who have found ways to fight back and to really seek solutions.
Amazing.
It's coming out this spring.
This spring. Okay, In a Day's Work. And Sasha, tell me just sort of last question about, you know, I know that we have laws in California and Oregon, you know, requiring training, and we were talking earlier about that training is important, but is there more work to do?
Definitely. I mean, I think there are some structural issues that have to be addressed. We talked about some of the solutions that some of these smaller janitorial companies are looking at. People working in pairs, people working during the day. I think also, you know, this first iteration of the bill in California, which basically requires more training for supervisors and for janitors, is a good first step. It creates a registry of companies, so these fly-by-night companies, the government can keep track of them. They can they can know who they are.
I think the Oregon law requires them to be like licensed and bonded.
Exactly, and they're very similar, the California and Oregon laws. But, you know, the initial intent when Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher proposed that bill here in California was to actually make the building owners, the tenants, accountable as well. She wasn't able to get that aspect through the last time, but in checking back in with her, she sees this Me Too moment. The fact that legislators in Sacramento are grappling with this within their own ranks is kind of raising an awareness. And she hopes that there can be some momentum so that, you know, there's this additional layer, which is these guys are cleaning corporate offices. They're cleaning buildings, you know, where people are contracting with these companies and trying to put a little bit of accountability on them, too. This is happening in your building, in your corporate headquarters, in your health clinic.
Yeah, you need sticks and carrots. You need financial incentives for people to do the right thing.
But you can imagine that's a very difficult thing to get through.
I can imagine, yeah. This is a moment, though. And it seems like your reporting has underscored that this is something that's been going on for a long time. Women at all levels are experiencing it. It's really powerful stuff. I want to thank you both for answering the questions and for your continued work on this. We have a full hour radio show on Saturday devoted to this issue. We have many stories, updated stories available. There's the full hour-long Frontline documentary, Sasha's radio updates on the California Report, which is a statewide public radio program. We have a good place to start to find this content is on revealnews.org/night shift. And that'll get you to the pieces of incredible work that you all have done on this. So I want to thank you both.
Thank you.
And
thank you to everybody who wrote in and is watching and is engaging with this.
Thank you.
People know that this is important, and we appreciate the discussion and the questions. So that's all for now. Thanks for joining us.